some people are more accepting than others of EOD, and it takes some time to build some trust. And the guys who've done a lot of experience, they knew the value of EOD.
Yeah.
But you still had to earn it.
Welcome to the Echo Oscar Delta podcast, where we talk to Navy EOD techs and hear the stories that they want to share. All ideas, thoughts, and statements are those of the guest and the host of Echo Oscar Delta, and not of Navy EOD or Navy as a whole. Today we have Brian Kirk, did 11 years active, currently is in the reserves, and is a commander.
Yes.
That is awesome, by the way. Super pumped.
You met me when I was an ensign. So.
I did. This was a couple days ago that we met.
Right.
And then you've done basically 4 deployments, because we did a couple Iraq and Afghanistan, and then enough time, like overtime in Korea,
right, to almost count that as a deployment.
Yeah. So I appreciate you coming on talking.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.
It's your birthday today, and I think we were catching up before this, but the last time I saw you, I don't remember when it was, but you were the first enlisted guy I met. When we started dive school. So
Yeah.
I don't remember, like, it was you and a couple other people that were part of my kind of initial, I don't even know what you would call it, was a team, right?
Yeah.
Going into it. But we started, as officers the week prior. And then I remember you were the first guy I met. So
Yeah.
it always stuck in my head, right, over the years. And catching up with you, it's always been great.
Nice. Yeah. It's funny, you sit down with somebody that you went to dive school with and had history with, and there's so many like just sitting here, so many things at dive school and EOD school just
Right.
like play through my mind, and like, God, we had such a good time.
You got to think about that time. Like when I do, it's, that was a time we had before we had a lot of commitments, and the whole thing was just focused on training. And then on the days and the weekends, going to Destin or beach volleyball, Quigley's, McGuire's, wherever it was. But, that life was somewhat simple in comparison to, what it is now. And it's not that it's bad or anything. It's great. But looking back at that, I mean, it was such a simple existence in some ways.
Yeah, we pretty much had one goal in life, and that's go through EOD school, dive school, just survive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then, make the most of our time off, which I feel like we did a pretty good job of doing that too.
I think so. Yeah, definitely. And we had a great class. I mean, for sure.
Absolutely.
Going to dive school and then going into EOD school, and we had some people in our class, so we just had a solid group of guys.
Yeah.
The whole time. Yeah.
I've got a picture on my refrigerator of when we did the what was it? We did the khaki shorts and the white t-shirt at the beach.
That was it. I think that was by Underwater.
Yep.
I think over there. Yeah.
God, that was. It was a good class.
It was good. Yeah.
Getting into kind of how you got into EOD. You have kind of a how do you say it? Interesting, or like story to like finding the military, and then like what it kind of did for you. You want to kind of dive into that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So going in, my initial interest in the military, I think it was a few different things. One of them had some family history, not my parents' generation, but that World War II generation, which I know a lot of people had, a lot of family members from that generation. Both of my grandfathers served in World War II. One actually passed away, but my grandfather, when my grandmother remarried, my next grandfather also served. They also served in the Navy, not so much in combat, but I did have a couple great uncles that served kind of in a combat situation. One of them was in the landings in Okinawa, so very active, and he had multiple valor awards. And then another great uncle, he was also in the Navy, but a torpedo bomber pilot, and actually he actually got the Navy Cross for sinking a Japanese cruiser. So it was one of those things where there was like a lot of history there, and especially talking to some of them. One thing I do regret now that you've got this podcast is I wish I would have like interviewed them and like had more of a, I think they call them like legacy videos where you kind of
Yeah.
like get that existence and capture that history. So that's a little bit of a regret of mine. But I had that, and then of course I was post 9/11, so 9/11 happened when I was a junior in high school. So that was another factor that affected me. And then of course just the benefits. I didn't know the full benefits of being in the military, but I was looking at a couple different routes going into. One of them was going to ROTC, to pay for college and go the officer route. One of them I actually looked at going the enlisted route, and I was almost 50-50 going either way. I would have gone to college. So I grew up in Northern California, a town called Chico, and there's a city called Davis, University of California, Davis. So I actually looked at going to Davis and then joining the Marines, and there was a Marine Reserve unit out of Reno, like a reconnaissance unit. So I almost did that. But then I got into some other schools and I had the full scholarship, and really that kind of weighed on my decision. So I ended up going to ROTC at USC. So I think that going into my whole mindset was like I wanted to serve. But I grew up in kind of a household, only child, very great childhood. We never moved around. So my dad was a biochemistry professor. My mom was a dental hygienist and went on to be the mayor of the city I was in. So it was really interesting. Had some fun stories about that as well, if we get further into the podcast. But so I kind of like grew up almost thinking I was going to be like a professor at a college. But the whole military thing sort of drew me into a different pathway. And this is before I knew about EOD. So at this stage of my life, I actually, when I decided to go to college at the University of Southern California, I do ROTC. I actually did the Marine Corps ROTC. So it was a Marine option going into that. And then that's where kind of like my decision made and going into EOD, because I discovered that during my summer of my freshman year. They have like basically in ROTC, they have it's called career orientation training for midshipmen. It's basically a month and you spend it with different communities. But the big ones in the Navy, like the surface fleet, submarine fleet, aviation, and the Marines. And within that period, I think one of those weeks we spent like a half day or a day, went out to the range. I'm pretty sure it was the elephant. Now I'm looking back on it. I think it was the elephant cages back there. And they did like a little bit of a demo shot. You drove the robot around. So we got to see that. And then we back to EOD Melvina 3 and they gave us a presentation. So this is back in 2004. So a team that had just gotten back from Iraq and presenting on what they were doing. And I was kind of hooked from there. So that was sort of my initial hooks into me, the EOD getting into me. And then as I did more research, I discovered it was like a great place for me. Like it made like it just fit my personality and my what I felt I was good at. So that's kind of where I took it from there.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's interesting you bring up family history with the military. And so on my side, my dad he only did 2 years in the Air Force. But what's interesting is when I made chief, I didn't know it at the time, and I have the same kind of regret. I wish I would have known it before, and I wish I would have talked to him. I have like I guess he's like a second uncle or something. I don't know. It gets weird when it's not direct, and I'm not confused. But it's like my mom's uncle, right? So he made chief in the Pacific during World War II, and I guess he ended up being the youngest chief in the Pacific. And it was purely so I ended up talking to his son and, got some history on it and whatnot. And I guess it was interesting. This is how terrible, like, everything was, over there.
Yeah.
Because he made chief because he was someone else
passed away.
Yeah. And like, Dang. But it's,
Yeah.
I thought the exact same thing. Like, man,
Right.
I wish I would have, you know, known that and then gotten
Yeah.
history and
Yeah.
yeah.
And I was lucky enough to, I never interviewed, or I think my uncle that was the Navy torpedo bomber. I never got a chance to talk to him, but my great uncle that was the, served in the Okinawa and was like infantry, he didn't share much with anybody, but
Right.
he did share a bit more, I think, with me. And
Okay.
this is back when I just joined
Yeah.
EOD, like I was very junior. But I think just having some connection there,
Right.
he was able to share some with me. I want to say somewhere I got to find it. I have some of the like my notes because I had to do some kind of story about it, but I just, that's one of those things you wish you'd gotten more out of it
Yeah.
because it's just like that's priceless. Like getting
Yeah.
those memories or just learning about kind of, especially if it's your own family too, it's
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, just diving into I wasn't even on purpose, but I was gonna say diving in to
no
EOD
problem.
and
Yeah,
dive
yeah,
school.
yeah.
Um,
Right.
so getting into dive school, I mean, like I said, I can think of a million
Sure.
things that we did and just having a good time. Um, how did you enjoy that? Like, was it what you expected?
I think somewhat. Like I did a lot of preparation going into dive school. I remember back, so when I graduated, I had the summer. I think we classed up in, I want to say it was July, I think, maybe
Mm-hmm.
late July. And so I spent the summer and even that like before, during, I joined the club team, the triathlon team. So I was like really swimming a lot, getting ready. Um, I remember like watching back at the ROTC unit, like going on the team or the computer they had there and watching like dive school videos and like
Yeah.
with the pump up music, like the pool hits and all
Yeah.
that. And like, they're like, all right. And so, and then we had one of our Marine officer instructors kind of doing he helped us out a bit. Like he kind of did some hits for us in the pool and we did
Nice.
some prep. So I think I had some concept of going into it, just at least watching those YouTube or whatever platform, I mean, it was YouTube,
Yeah.
whatever platform it was on, but watching some of those videos and kind of saying, okay, this is what I have to expect. But
Yep.
of course, when you get there, I don't know if I expected everything, but one thing I remember is like, so I was in California at the time and driving across the East Coast and then like getting to Florida in July. I don't think I'd really traveled off the West Coast. I wasn't very
Yeah.
well traveled growing up, which is fine, but I mostly traveled to see grandparents in Seattle and San Diego. And I grew up in Northern California in Chico, which is almost like midway between Seattle and San Diego. But I remember that first day getting into Florida and it was so humid.
Yeah.
And I'm like literally I'm not working out, but my shirt is soaked.
Yeah.
I'm like, what is going on? And so it took me some time to like get used to that humidity. But it was also nice because before you guys showed up, we had a week. It was 7 of us, I think, 7 officers. One of them was Chris Moscow.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so some of those memories of Chris, it was a great group of guys, and especially Chris, and trying to hold on to those memories because those are the ones where you're like, sometimes I almost have to like actively think about that, so I feel like I don't lose some of those memories of Chris, like spending those first days. We're going to the beach, doing some like runs on the beach. I remember we went to a movie, tailgating a bit, and
Yeah.
and he had such a distinct voice. So it was, like I think that helped kind of ground or just give me a little bit of. It is nice before a dive school actually kicked off. We had basically a week to like kind of get ourselves situated, and then that's where I met you, and and then everybody else. So yeah,
Yeah. I actually didn't think about that because we, on the enlisted side, we already had three or
Right.
4 weeks together
Sure.
where, we were doing our initial portion of the selection, right?
Right.
And like trying to get people to quit.
Yeah.
And that kind of like brought the enlisted side together.
Yeah.
But then, we came down and then it was pretty quick. I feel like our class was pretty quick from
Yeah.
the enlisted getting together with the officers and
I
like,
thought we got along really well
Yeah.
and we jived well. And yeah, I think I remember that maybe that first weekend we did some like a couple barbecues or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. But I felt we just sort of integrated, and there wasn't really, it was pretty seamless for
Yeah.
the most part. And then going in, and dive school itself was fairly shorter than it is now,
Yep.
and before. So I think that time went by pretty quick
Yeah.
to me. But yeah, certainly some some yeah. Was it Club La Vila? I think
Yeah.
we went there and like what?
Have you been down there recently?
Uh, I haven't. I haven't been there in a while, and I kind of want. I know it's changed quite a bit. Like,
It's so different.
really,
Like,
yeah,
so I worked it out recently with the UMS team.
yeah,
I went down to uh, wherever that is, to dive school area, right? And I brought the family down, so I actually took my travel trailer and I got a campsite, and so the family like stayed at this campsite, and it was right across the street from Club La Vila and Spinnakers and all that, and it was almost depressing because after the hurricane, I guess it like shut everything down. Plus the new,
right.
well, I guess it's not new now, but the rules for drinking on the beach, like
Changed.
yeah.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah,
It's just literally the parking lots are like weeds are growing up through it, and those buildings haven't been
Weird.
used in
Okay.
forever. Yeah, it's like sitting across, like just like visually looking at it, and in my mind playing back us like walking through the parking lot and then going back.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
man, dude.
yeah. With that pool there. Yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah.
yeah, that was interesting. Yeah, I think back to being at dive school and like the morning tradition of getting. Yeah, pretty much everybody got like an extra hard-boiled egg, and then we just stand on the quay wall and like break it up and
Right.
throw it in to feed the fish.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I remember they had like the go bag, right? Like
Yeah.
it was a plastic bag, and you could just put in the hard-boiled eggs. And,
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah.
so much fun.
Yeah.
Have you seen the dive school video that I made for us?
I know I haven't. I need to maybe see that. Yeah, you're
I'll
gonna
have
have
to
to show
show
that
you
to
that.
me. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So it opens up with, you remember Zach?
yeah, yeah,
So it opens up with, and Zach, I'm saying this on purpose.
yeah.
So you could hear it's the underwater microphone, right? And you can hear, okay, I've heard it, or I've seen it all now. We've got a guy taking a pool hit, grabbing his straps, and plugging his nose. So Zach,
Yeah.
he kept getting water in his nose, so he'd grab his tank straps
Yeah.
and just plug his nose.
Yeah.
Just sit there like this, taking the pool hit.
I remember, so my first pool hit, that was, I think we started with lights, and then maybe it was a medium hit, and I think I got like I was in the wrong breathing pattern, and I just sucked in a bunch of water,
no.
and I went up, and instantly they bring me up, like the safety diver, and then the guy doing the hit, the chief there, and he's like, what's going on, you want to stay here, you want to quit, like. And it didn't even cross my mind there. I was like, no, I'm not going to quit.
Yeah.
Over that, so, yeah. But I just remember that. And then I kind of like, after that, I kind of got in a better mindset, I think, going to the next one. So I was a little bit like, just going to maybe anticipate when the hit was going to happen. But yeah, that was, that was a little bit of a wake up call, that first bigger hit. And then kind of got used to it. But
yeah. You remember our proctor?
Urso, or is that no
It was. Oh, I thought it was a big fish.
big fish? Okay,
Yeah.
maybe you're right. Yeah,
So Ursa. No, you're right. Actually, it was. It was, and it was. But big fish played a part into it because remember we were always able to convince him to like let us do kind of what we wanted for PT.
yeah,
And I remember we were out on a run and we like hid a football or something. I don't know, like Harry, I think, had it. And we got a little ways down on the run, and like Harry was like, "Hey, got this football. How about we just play, like speedball or what was something,
Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh no," because we had already we and him had already gotten in trouble by big fish for just having fun before we're supposed to, right?
Sure.
And Eventually they convinced him. So we started playing, and sure enough, dude, we're like not 5 minutes into it, and Big Fish comes running along. Oh, dude, it was so funny. Like
Yeah.
that our proctor just got reamed, and then we got beat for
Yeah,
like,
sure.
but
Yeah, I think he was pretty good to us, our proctor. And
yeah,
anyway,
yeah,
like he was maybe he was nicer to us than he had to be sometimes, but certainly like one other thing I remember too is like that first swim in the bay, and then you know how they make it longer than
yep,
it is, and most people fail, and then like they're trying to get you in that mindset of like, hey, you failed, like, what are you going to do about it? And I felt like most that didn't really affect our class too much. We were
no,
just kind of like, oh, and I think maybe we even consciously thought like, okay, yeah, they're gonna make it longer, and then, well, I mean, we didn't have a very high dropout rate, not because it wasn't, not because it was like easy, but just because I thought like we were pretty tight, and then
yeah,
like for the most part, we like boosted everyone's morale too. Like, and we had it was a fun, we
dude,
made it fun.
we had
So
so much
even when
fun.
it was getting beat, like if you have that fun mentality, and that goes with
Yeah,
almost anything. Like if you have that cohesion, like, and you're going through a stressful experience, it just makes it so much like more palatable to get
yeah,
through that. And I think that was a key for us, was just like, at least key for me. I
yeah.
didn't like trying to go through. Yeah.
No,
I
hundred
enjoyed that.
percent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Like it seemed like all of us loved just getting hammered on like that.
Yeah.
You, if you wanted to break us,
Yeah.
the thing that they should have done was just keep everything super nice and easy, right? Because
Yeah.
the more we like suffered together, I remember being in the pool and passing around the bricks and
Oh
stuff, right,
yeah,
in
the
the
pool PT.
circle.
Yeah.
And
That
there
was
was a
fun.
DMO class, and they're sitting in the bleachers, right?
Yeah.
And we're singing some Journey song as we're
Yeah,
doing
of
this.
course.
And like I remember looking over, and it was just like the longest faces on
Yeah.
everybody up there. Like, what? Why are they okay with this? Like,
Yeah.
what is happening? The
Right.
instructors are yelling us, they're like, "Shut up!
Yeah.
No singing!" And we're just singing louder, just like, "Come on, get us!"
Not much they could do about it, because I
No,
know it, and I think in the back of their minds they probably understood like, hey, we're a pretty strong class, because we're
yeah,
just, everyone's kind of like getting into that mindset.
yeah.
And so yeah.
Yeah, being where I am now, I can imagine if I saw a class like that. Of course, I'm still going to yell at them because
Yeah,
that's my
you got
job.
it. Right.
But like inside, I'm like, this is exactly what I want. I
Yeah.
want
Yeah. You want
these
that.
people to
Yeah.
bond
And then if
together.
someone's struggling, but, helping them out,
Yeah,
and getting them across the finish line. And yeah,
yeah. Going into EOD school, I remember. So one of the things I remember in EOD school is there was multiple times where you would do interesting workouts on the weekend over on the range
yeah,
road.
yeah, right. Yeah. Yes.
taking taking your car and doing car pushes and
Yeah. So that I would take my Toyota Camry, infamous Toyota Camry, down, and I think eventually they like closed off Range Road. But if you
yeah,
remember back then,
dude, it
you
was
could just
open.
drive on.
Yeah,
Like you could, a civilian could just drive in and go walk around EOD school.
yeah,
Like there was no. I mean, now it's much more secure, but I would do that sometimes on the weekend, because it's kind of like fun. But
yeah.
every time like someone would be coming, stop by, and be like, hey man, do you need help? Like you're okay? Like, yeah, I'm just PT. Yeah, don't worry about it. So yeah, no, I
Yeah.
think I got in, and then I lived with a few other guys from our class in Niceville, which has its pros and cons, right? It
Hmm.
was closer, but then, and you'd have to do that bridge,
Yeah,
but then you're not as easy access to the beaches. But for, at least for doing those kind of PTs, it was just like 5 minute drive.
yeah,
Drive. We lived on Blue Water Bay. Um, yeah, I remember doing some swims in the bay, and then kind of like some of our PT too, where we would do some runs back in that kind of the sand area, on those roads back in,
hmm,
past EOD school. So, but yeah, some fond memories of doing some of those workouts.
yeah. I remember everybody used to always say that like you got that country boy strength, right? And I remember I don't remember why, but we'd come over to you guys' house in Blue Water Bay, and you weren't you weren't there. It was the roommates, and then we were like, "Where's Brian?" Like,
Yeah.
"Oh, he's over at the neighbor's house." And you come back, and I guess the neighbor had been like, "Hey, can I get some help like pulling this tree out?" And you went over and just grabbed the tree by the trunk, and literally just like manhandled it out of the ground.
Yeah. I don't think I could do that now, but back then it was like, yeah, that was, yeah.
The feats of strength.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Do you remember the hats?
the hats.
The
Oh
hat,
yeah.
yeah. So this is a little party thing I did back then. I was we had some drinking games, but yeah. So I would take a beer carton, and slam it over someone's head, and then kind of so they're almost in a straitjacket, and then yell hats. And I don't know how that started. I don't know, but I know I did it to a lot of you. I think you may have been on the receiving end.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You remember that?
It was always so funny because you'd like basically just like sneak up behind people and just boom,
Yeah.
hat.
Yeah.
Oh, those good times. Those good
Yeah.
times.
For sure. Yeah.
Oh man. Let's see. So I'm trying to think. Like, I rolled out of EOD school, rolled back a class, well, 2 classes
Yeah.
in underwater, and you went all the way through, right?
Yeah, I guess I don't remember you rolling. I don't even remember that. I went through, so if you remember our dive school class, like I think it was the officers, half of them continued on and went right to EOD school, and half had to wait for one class behind.
Yeah.
So I was in that initial group. And then there were some officers from the previous class that we all linked up with.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I went through all the way, fortunately, didn't roll.
Yeah.
But felt like even when did you roll?
It was literally the last test in underwater.
Underwater.
Yeah. I remember like everybody, the CMC of EOD school, and like everybody, they were like, this is a disgrace. This is our division. You don't roll in our division. I'm like, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think the first test in underwater was some like mine shape on the land, and I remember that one. I actually I think I passed it, but it was a close call.
Yeah.
Like, and so I could see how you could do it. I mean, it's just
Yeah, it was the written test, and like my thing. If you look at like all the ones that I got wrong, I was overconfident.
Yeah.
And the Navy, of course, like now I know, right? But back then, still fairly new to the Navy, right? In any multiple choice, you always have to look for the D, both B and C. And so like I remember multiple questions. One of them was, when diving deeper than 60 feet, what do you need? And I saw like 100 SCF or greater. Boom, putting that in. Or another option was twin 80s.
Yeah.
And it was like the last option was both B and C. And there are a few of those.
Yeah.
And I just see the first one that's right. Just be like, boom, got it.
Yeah.
Like, nailed this. And then they come back and they're like, you did not nail this. Sad face. But yeah, it was funny because I remember when I rolled and then heard, okay, you guys are taking the class picture, and then I got invited to the class picture still. So I was like,
well, you were still part of the class, even if you rolled, especially the last minute. It almost doesn't count.
Yeah, I agree.
Still part of our class. I mean, so yeah.
I feel like that's like a like culmination of who the class was, like or what the class was as a group. Like, just it didn't matter that somebody rolled; it was still part of it.
For sure. Yeah.
But, yeah. Going from EOD school to getting done with all the pipeline stuff, and then getting to the mobile unit.
You mean airborne training?
Yeah. Airborne.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, instead of just flying right by that, did you have any interesting things happen at airborne that you can actually talk about?
Yeah. No, I think, again, that was like an experience where some people going into it might not have a lot of fun, but I remember, like, me, and I'll say his name, I think Eric Christie is probably okay with me saying his name, but we were in the same group, and so when you would before you got in the plane and they send you out, they you had to do these, if you remember, like these different trainers where you would go
Yeah.
down and land in different positions or whatever. And there's a guy like the black hats,
Hmm.
like, and he'd have a pencil. It was blue or red, and we'd always like we'd be watching everybody, and these are like junior, and some of them were junior Army people, like I don't know, like 18-year-olds.
Yeah.
And he would come down, like one of these guys or girls would come down and they do their landing. Maybe it wasn't a great one, but we'd be yelling at the instructor, "That was a blue one, blue pencil, blue pencil." And he was like getting annoyed with us, but he didn't say anything. And so we were like, "That's blue." And Eric and I would just have this. We just made it fun. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was fun banter, and I feel like, and on your helmet you had a number.
Hmm.
I think vaguely it was maybe like 388 or something like that. I have a vague memory of that, and we would just call people's numbers out, be like, "Nice job, 40," like and so I think that was an experience where you could kind of like make, yeah, with anything you make the most of it.
Yeah.
But if you kind of have a nice attitude going through, it just kind of wasn't too bad.
Yeah.
Just like the rest of the training pipeline. So nothing. I think one of my landings was really hard, and I learned that if you're looking at something and there was like a truck down there, as looking at the truck, when you look at something, that's usually where you're gonna go.
Yeah.
So I almost hit the truck. I didn't hit it, but I hit a hard landing. So that was a lesson learned. But yeah, I think overall, nothing. Some people just like really dish on it, but I think
Yeah.
I had a fine experience there. So
Yeah. I could have done without it, but being there wasn't really a problem.
It's all right. We made the most of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Get into your mobile unit and
Sure.
then, starting to work up and everything, thinking about what we're told it's going to be like, and then, getting a little bit more exposure and instructors telling us a little bit more of what it's going to be like, and then getting to the mobile unit and seeing what it's actually like. How was your like perception before, and then when you get there, did it match?
Yeah, it's a great question. So getting there, I went to Mobile Unit 3,
Mhm.
and there was a whole group of officers that were going in around the same time within like a few month period. And I actually ended up being the first one. So I went on a platoon right away. I think I didn't really, I mean, I had some concept of what to expect, but, and still, I think partly too, when you come out of school, you got your basic badge, you kind of feel like a little bit of confident, you
Yeah.
got some confidence. So, as soon as you get there, you get some humble pie
Yeah.
right off the bat. And so you come in like, yeah, I just passed all this. I'm this awesome guy, like all this. And I think that initial humble pie of like, hey, you don't know anything,
Yeah.
like, just, don't, not say don't say anything, but be careful when you're sharing your opinions with experienced guys. And at Mobile Unit 3 at the time, we had a lot of guys that this is 2008 timeframe.
Yeah.
Had recently come back from theater,
Right.
mainly from Iraq, I think, at that time frame. But when you think about, it was only a few years before where we had Fallujah, we had guys there, we had guys in Ramadi in '05, and then several other areas that were very hot.
Yeah.
As far as IEDs, we had Nick Wilson, who was killed in action. So a lot of guys knew him. So it was a serious tone going into somewhat. Obviously there's a fun banter to a degree, but the seriousness, I think I didn't really get that till I got there to understand, like, hey, at this time frame, most of the platoons are going to Iraq. We're going to war,
Right.
and you got to be prepared for that combat. That you're going to be around IEDs. You're going to
Mhm.
whether most areas of Iraq. A lot of guys were going out west in Anbar, and some guys were going north into the Mosul area, south of Basra. So it was kind of, we had, at that time there was a lot of U.S. forces in Iraq. So we had
Yeah.
huge bases in Baghdad and all over. So there's a lot of teams going that way, and so instantly kind of being around guys, a lot of experienced guys, some who had already been to maybe 2 or 3 deployments,
Right.
at that point, and into combat, and you had some mad respect, right off the bat that these are the people, you have to, you're going to look up to and
Yeah.
you got to learn from, especially if you're going to go into combat too, you better learn from them because,
Right.
you're going to be in that situation. So, yeah, so I think, that whole, it was a sort of a mindset shift for me from the
Hmm.
school and the training pipeline being fun, and not to say that the fun turned off, but that now like it got real, it got real,
Yeah.
so to speak, right?
Yeah, I'd totally agree. Even in, I think by the time I got there, so I got to the mobile unit 5
Yeah.
in February, I think it was, of 2009. So
Mhm.
probably what, 6, 9 months behind you guys
Yeah.
when you got to 3. But I would say the exact same thing. The first team I was supposed to go to Iraq, and as soon as you get put on that team, it's like, discussions about like, hey, this is what we're training for.
Right.
It's real. Like, have a good time,
Sure.
but like, you better take everything 100% serious.
Right. Take it serious. I mean, again, there's time for humor. It's got to
Yeah.
be time for humor, right?
Yep.
But some of the guys had just been back from Solder City or some of these areas that were just real bad, bad
Yeah.
areas for IEDs, and so I think that you just had to know when to take this, be serious and be focused, and then when you can kind of like throw in some humor. And I
Yeah.
think I didn't really know how to do that yet, so when you get into that situation, you kind of like, it's probably the best to just observe and
Yeah.
kind of like like obviously you're participating, but don't interject when you shouldn't.
Yeah.
Like in that kind of thing. So I think I tried to learn that
Yeah.
fairly quickly.
Yeah. That's a good point. I think it takes a little bit to kind of figure out, we all have this, after you've been in for a little while, this little bit of a dark humor,
Yeah.
a little
Everyone's
bit
got
of
dark
like,
humor.
yeah.
Yeah.
And after a while, you kind of learn when to, okay, like, this is a time to make that joke. And
Yeah.
then,
Yeah.
like, okay, right now is not the time to make that
I
joke.
feel like you're always on point with the jokes. You have like a funny, like, this sense of humor that you can throw in. Like, yeah, that was pretty funny. Like, yeah, that's a good time for that joke. But you're right. Some points, it's just not time for that. You need to be locked on for whatever the mission is
Yeah.
at that point.
How'd your first deployment go?
It went well. So I got to the mobile unit in, I think, about October timeframe of 2008. I deployed in July. We didn't team up until December, January timeframe.
Oh, really?
So we were accelerated on
Yeah.
our training unit. It was basically training unit and then a
And then
little
go.
bit of post and then go.
Yeah.
And our chief got injured like early on, so we
Okay.
had to get a replacement. I think I'm okay with saying his name because he was also great. He basically took our team. He's a mentor to me. He has a very rough kind of style, but blunt at times. His name's
Yeah.
Jerry Huff. He retires as Master Chief, but he took our team from where it was very junior team overall, and he kind of got us like, hey, because he had just been back from multiple deployments, and he got us in the mindset and knew exactly what we needed to do, and we had a very short time frame when he picked up our team, and yeah, and then we did pretty well for a junior team in the training unit. We did have to repeat like a chem drill. I remember doing that, and I actually think I repeated it like it was something we did at China Lake, and then it was, what do you call like when you have to do the your
The 40
bagging,
Yeah.
and all that, and
The barber Poland.
yeah, and I was like doing that, and it was so hot. I remember wearing the mop gear, and I think I did something backwards, and so they failed us, and so we had to repeat that. This is our mobile unit R&T did that, so fortunately we were able to pass that after the training unit, but there really wasn't much time. I think we did a 12-week training per unit, and since we started in January timeframe, is when we actually formed as a team. We probably started the training in February or March, and so we were done with training in May. So And then we had like a month or so, so a little bit of time to leave, but we also had to kind of do some specific preps for our deployment, kind of getting ready. So, yeah, it was kind of an accelerated workup, but deployment went pretty well. We were in Iraq. It was kind of a time frame where there were things going on. It wasn't super busy, but enough where you got some decent work out of it.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've learned throughout all my deployments and everything I've done is like the importance of building relationships. And so we were a MOB team assigned to Western Iraq, and we were in a bunch of different places. My particular team I was on, there's three of us. We were way out west at Ubaidi, like on Al Qaim, so essentially on the Syrian border, which was basically ended up being prime ISIS territory. Later on, that was like deep ISIS territory. But I remember just getting there and building the relationships with them. We were the last Navy EOD team to directly support the Marines.
Oh, really?
So after that, it was all Marine EOD supporting Marines.
Okay.
But there was a time frame from the beginning of the war to about when with us being the last team, where the Marines didn't have enough EOD to support all of their infantry or recon units or whoever. And so as they were building up their capability, Navy was augmenting. And so there were plenty of teams beforehand that, especially guys that were in Fallujah or those kind of areas and out west, that were working with Marines. But it was great. We worked with a Marine infantry team. And so we were a MOB team. We were assigned. So whenever they would give us a call for something, we would go and respond. But when I say relationships, we were able to do, we started like a training program with the local Iraqi EOD team. And so something we kind of did like a basic forensics course with them, some things like that. So we were able to do that training. And then on top of that, there was a SEAL platoon there, or at least part of one from SEAL Team 7. There was a gap in their EOD capability. And that's where like we were able to build the relationship to like let us in, because they didn't have to let us in, right? And so, and I've seen both my other deployments, same kind of thing, where we built something and they trusted us enough to like, hey, okay, you can come with us. So it was great because I ended up going to an SW platoon afterwards, but I was able to like see kind of how they prep for missions and then go on some missions with them. So I kind of like had some visual of that when I went into an NSW workup. So that was something that I think was, again, a benefit that we got out of we worked with the Marine Corps HUMIT team. Again, it's something like they brought us in, let us do things. So there was a lot of instances like that where I feel like you can kind of like do the minimum and just sit on the fob and just wait for a call you have to do that, right? Or you could do a bit more and try to like make it more of an experience. In fact, like the Army took over all of our positions like midway through a deployment. We could have gone home, but we ended up staying. We supported the Marines out of Al Taqaddum doing route clearance. So maybe not the most exciting thing, but it was still interesting. We were able to, there were IEDs, and we were able to kind of work with that, doing route clearance. So yeah, it was kind of an interesting deployment. I learned a ton, and it certainly helped me prepare for my next thing.
Yeah. I think one of our biggest strengths is the fact that we are able to pretty quickly build a relationship and work with people that different units that work so differently.
Yeah,
and like
absolutely.
It's awesome. It gives us the ability to do things.
Yeah, that's in our DNA, to be adaptable. And I think it's most EOD techs, Navy EOD techs, are going to seek out more work, for the most part, right? I'd say 90+% of the time, if you're on a team, you're on deployment, most guys don't want to just sit around. So you're trying to find work that's you can contribute. You're going to help someone else out, but you also get the benefit of doing something interesting, and it's just you want to have some more purpose.
Exactly. The purpose. That's a perfect word for it. And I think right now it's a weird time in EOD, right? And the thing that people are trying to find is that purpose, that work that we can do. Because the worst thing for us is to like just sit on our hands,
Yeah,
you know?
no, absolutely. And that affects retention, that affects so many things. And the desert Iraq, Afghanistan type of mission set, Middle East mission set was very clear kind of from
Mhm.
us. But when you get into this sort of new paradigm shift of great power competition and you're looking at near peer, rivalries, how does the Navy EOD fit into that? I mean, I'm on the periphery now, right? I'm not in active duty, but that's something that I think takes some time to evolve to figure
Mhm.
out where do we fit in best. And
Yeah.
then how do you do when you fit in, how do you get guys excited about it?
Right.
Like so they want to stay and they want to support whatever that new shift
Yeah.
in mentality is
Yeah.
going to.
Yeah. I agree. And, it's, I think something that we have to understand is if you look at like history, every time there's a massive conflict, there's an
Sure.
uptick, right?
Right.
Like people in the special operations communities, they join because that's what they want
Yeah.
to do,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And then after, there tends to be like a drawdown because
Mhm.
people are like, well, I want to do this, and there's none of that.
No, yeah.
So I, I don't know. I guess I'll go find something else.
Yeah.
And it's just a thing. And so yeah, we
Yeah.
we have to figure out kind of
And I think eventually you hit, as you go on this path long enough, you'll hit the state where people going in, joining will know that that's
exactly.
kind of like that was part of the history, but that's not the present.
Yep.
So I think that mindset of like, hey, I'm going to Afghanistan is obviously that's not going to happen right
Right.
now. So, but I would say too, like that mindset shift happened in 9/11 for all the Navy OD. Again, we weren't in, right?
Right.
But everybody from the 90s generation, they had to make a mindset shift
Yep.
when the GWAT happened, so that was part of that mentality shift. And then the community shifted really well, I think, and stayed in that track for a long time. And then now it's kind of we're at that period of time where we're kind of shifting again. And
Yeah.
I think it's just maybe it's not as easy of a shift as it is if you're in the Navy in a surface or submarine. It's an easier shift from there. But when we're special operations teams, that you just got to find your niche and where you can contribute and where it makes sense within the new mission.
Yep, absolutely. So you said the second team was you got an NSW team. How was the shift, right? Going from MOB to NSW.
It was pretty even though I had the MOB experience and I spent some, did some operational work with the Team 7 on my deployment, it was still a big shift
Yeah.
for me and I think for the whole team. We started with a fairly junior team. My team was 351, platoon 351, and we started and we went right into the training unit too. So I got back in kind of December of 09 to January 2010 timeframe, and I think we started the training in March. So it's
Oh,
like
wow.
no time to
Yeah.
I mean, like nowadays, you probably can attest to that the workups are a bit more organized and
Yeah.
set out, but this was like the time frame where people were just
Yep.
turning and burning, and so we started with a fairly junior team, almost no time to get ready for the training unit, and then thrusting us into the training unit. I'm gonna name drop him. Hopefully, he doesn't mind because he was a great guy, great mentor to me. It was Mark Britton. He retired as a command master chief of EOD Group 1, but he was my team chief and huge part of our success.
Yeah.
Obviously, just like I feel like Jerry was for that first team. Like we couldn't have done it without an experienced guy, like
Right.
being able to lead, especially in these short time frames. So yeah, it was Mark and I and kind of leading that team through the training unit, and we did actually really well at the training unit, and was an NSW focused. It was like one of those where you don't do any MCM. It's like one day of diving, and
Yeah.
it's all heavy soft workup, and a lot of time at China Lake, and felt like we did a lot of time, like just that really helped. And from my own standpoint, what I would do, because I'm one somebody who always wants to be as prepared as possible, I would go with Mobile Unit 3 R&T, and I would go and they would, again, developing relationships. They allowed me to go with them when they were running drills on other NSW teams.
Okay. Yeah.
So I could get as much experience, like seeing the people, how they look at different IED drills, whether it's like a suicide vest or whatever, if you're going to a certain, how do they skin the cat, so to speak,
Yeah.
or a cache, like how do they approach that? So that helped me in my mindset because I needed that as well, like going through our workup. And I think that benefited me and overall as a team. Yeah, like I said, the training unit went well for us, um, and I think that was one of my proud accomplishments. I remember in EOD, like getting through that with a junior team, getting through the
Yeah.
training unit one, like successfully, and not just getting through it,
Right.
like getting some pretty high marks. And then for me personally, probably my proudest accomplishment in EOD is not the officer badge or the awards or anything. My proudest personal accomplishment would be making EOD team leader, like getting that,
Yeah.
being able as an officer to like, have that qual, because not all officers get that, right?
No.
So to being able to work independent or in a two-man element, because that to me that was a pretty serious qualification to get. Like I put
Yeah.
that, and a lot of people put that high on the list. Like once the RNT signs off on you as an EOD, and the skipper signs you as you're qualified as an EOD team leader, you can now work in an operational environment.
Yep.
Generally in two-man teams, but sometimes it's solo, and be competent and
Right.
and 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 not be a risk to yourself or to the people you're working with.
Yeah.
So that for me that required a lot of drills, and I got through it. Yeah. So
Yeah. Uh, that actually makes me think. So, during that time frame, obviously there's a lot going on, right?
right.
And the types of teams you're on, and then where you were going to deploy, like it was serious. Being a junior officer in that time frame, right? Even on the second team, right? You have a team of a full deployment of experience coming back, and now you're I guess in a way like a vetted junior officer, right?
Yeah.
In charge of a team again. How was it working with your LCPO and you being you're responsible for that team, even
Yeah.
though it's interesting because you're responsible for that team and you sign for all the things for that team, but time wise, your LCPO generally has like triple the amount of time.
Oh yeah, he had a lot more time, and it's an interesting dynamic because as an officer, you're kind of the lead of the team, but really LCPO, you can't do anything. Like they're so critical, and really they run a lot of the day to day and make sure everything's situated. And as an officer, you're doing that as well, and you have to, because if you, especially in a sub team, you got to qualify as a team leader.
Right.
But at the same time, you're kind of working with kind of that higher, it's like the down and in versus the up and out, and kind of you're doing a little bit more up and out. Not to say the LCPO isn't doing that, but I mean, it was a challenging job for him from Mark, because we had a junior team going through, and that we had our own issues, right? Like any team.
Yeah.
And same with me. Like I had my things that I messed up. So, but I think as a team we just got through it, and
Yeah.
so we kind of, and then our last thing we did right before the NSW workup was we were the first, I believe we were the first EOD team to go through 0 Point, the
Okay.
special operations whole course,
Yep.
whatever they did with Virginia Beach, because I remember writing an after action report with
Yeah.
the group. And so, that was a kind of a high note for us too, like having that, being able to do that. We shipped all, it was in Virginia Beach, so shipped all of our gear out, or a bunch of our gear out. And then from there, we went into the NSW workup, and that was kind of another mindset shift. So for me, when you go in there, you split up into different smaller elements, right, for each platoon. The particular platoon I was with, definitely, I mean, like any NSW team, a lot of type A personalities, and some people are more accepting than others of EOD, and it takes some time to build some trust. And generally what I've just, well, at least from my own experience, the most junior guys that had never done a platoon were a little bit more accepting right away.
Yeah.
It was the guys who'd done one platoon that were a little bit more cynical or distrustful. And then the guys who'd done a lot of experience, they were also more trusting. Well, I wouldn't say trusting. They knew the value of EOD.
Yeah.
But you still had to earn it to be
Right.
able to get their trust. And at the time, I was a lieutenant JG. And, so it was not it was a tough situation going. And the guys who were in the team I work with, the SEALs, a bunch of them had served with Chris Kyle and
Okay.
Ramadi.
Yeah.
They had seen some heavy combat, so they knew the value of EOD. But at the same time, they were pretty well battle, hardened.
Yeah.
And so it was a situation where you had to like step up your game.
Yeah.
And kind of going back to how I grew up, I was an introvert. I grew up as an only child.
Yeah.
And this is one of the situations where you have to not say completely break the mindset or my personality, but I learned there are times where I had to step up and be more assertive, and to, and that was something that I've carried with me, throughout that. But that was an experience that was definitely a challenging experience,
Yeah.
going through the entire workup. But the first spot where I earned some trust was we went to land warfare.
Yeah.
And it was like 4 weeks. And throughout that experience, EOD, I think, as a history of care, so the end of it, you're doing FTXs, and you have miles gear on where it tells you if you get hit or if you're dead. But I think it's sort of by design. EOD is carrying a lot more people out.
Yeah.
So like as people get killed and you're carrying sometimes long distances. And so that was part of the element where like, hey, you got to step it up. And so I think I earned some respect at that point, and then kind of helped me through the rest of the ULT.
Yeah. Deploying with those guys on the NSW team, how was that?
So interesting you say this, because I actually didn't deploy with them.
Oh,
so,
really?
Yeah. So it's a story. Okay. So what happened was we went through the ULT. We got through that. I think that was maybe February timeframe, early March, about February of this is 2011. And at the time, we didn't really have a clear mission of where we were going. I went through some challenges during that period. I had some things going on in my personal life that affected me. And then from a work standpoint, I think our morale as a team was a little bit uncertain because we didn't have a mission. Like, we didn't know where we were going.
Yeah.
Then there was talk we were going to go to Iraq, but there really wasn't much going on in Iraq at that time. And so what ended up happening is that we sort of continued to train with this is SEAL Team 1. But then about June timeframe, our OPSO, he basically like made a push to get us to go to Afghanistan because there was a need for more EOD teams to support mainly Army, Green Berets, Special Forces. And there was a big dearth of just a lacking of EOD. And you had all these Army Special Forces, mostly the 18 Charlies, the engineers, doing a lot of IED clearance. It wasn't really wasn't really their main job. It's kind of outside of their job scope a bit. But they were doing it because they had to. So there was an opportunity, and our OPSO, to his credit, he grabbed that opportunity. I don't know if this happened to any other EOD team. Maybe you could find out. But where an EOD team assigned to a SEAL team, taken away from the SEAL team and going to fill a different request in Afghanistan. And the SEALs didn't like that.
Yeah.
Because, when you lose your EOD, not great for what mission you're going to do on your deployment. And so they went to Iraq, I think, but they really didn't do much. And I think maybe even had some, when you're same with EOD, when we sit on our hands, there can be problems, right?
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
But what happened for us is that, at this point, my mindset was a little bit clouded, I could say. Again, I'm having some personal challenges going on, and made it through the workup, so that was great. But once we shifted to that, my mindset shifted like that because we had to be there in less than a month,
really?
To Afghanistan.
Jeez.
And so from that moment until we got on that C-17, all I did was focus pretty much on getting our team ready. Because you think about all the logistics, getting all our gear over, getting C-17 scheduled, all the different things that go into that. It's a lot. And then we had to get our own team ready. Not that we weren't ready, but kind of do more battle order specific to where we were going. So So we did lots of drills at Otai, like the Otai areas where it was nice because at Moment 3 we had a lot of guys who just came back from Afghanistan.
Yeah.
I mean, at the time our team too was we started junior, but because of injuries and just other attrition, we ended up changing our team makeup.
Okay.
And so we went from the very junior team to actually quite senior.
Oh, really?
And one of the guys that joined our team kind of later on was Chad Reglin. So
Okay.
wearing the shirt right here.
Yeah.
But he was one of the guys that was key to getting us ready. He had just got back in from Afghanistan. And so he was hugely helpful to getting our team prepped in these last few weeks.
Yeah.
From a gear standpoint, from drill standpoint, from looking at what we should expect. And we had other guys at Moment 3 that come back. And I'll tell one quick story on that. That's funny because you're going to find this funny. So one of the guys had just gotten back. I'm not going to say his name because I think he might still be active duty, but very experienced, multiple deployments, combat deployments, multiple soft deployments. He's presenting to us at R&T, like in the conference room, going through the order of battle, what to expect. It's basically IEDs everywhere, like we're going. Like we were sending guys to Helmand and I think at the time Kandahar and IEDs everywhere. I mean, every day firefights, like this is what you should expect going in. And we're like, okay, like we're getting in that mindset, like this is what we expect.
Yeah.
And then he throws on, that's not it. Also, jungle cats. Jungle cat. We're like, fuck, jungle cats? What? He's dead serious. And there's jungle cats, and then they're in Afghanistan. I think I looked it up and he was right. And I'm like, what? Not only do we have to worry about IEDs and Taliban, there's jungle cats. So of course that wasn't like, he was serious about it. That was a threat. It wasn't like a main threat, but we're like, holy shit. Like, so, but I think after that, just, all that training leading up to it, I felt like we were as prepared as we were going to be once we got on that plane. And that's like the first time I took like a sigh because there's nothing more I could do at that point. Our gear was on the plane. Everything was set. I got like all the documents I needed to bring and we were on our way. Yeah. And so so that was, and then we basically got there in Kandahar and then kind of started splitting different ways to different areas. So, yeah.
How was doing a workup? Obviously, the NSW does things one way, SF does things a different way, and it's really pronounced. Like if you're doing stuff in a house, but there's still little differences, in basically everything. How was it doing the workup with NSW, but then deploying and working with?
So we had guys supporting. SEAL Team 10, I think in the eastern part. I forgot what district, or Ruzgan province. I forgot which province that was. I was working with the Army in Kunduz, which was kind of like a province where there was Taliban activity and it kind of like ebbed and flowed, like the amount of IEDs and things like that. It was certainly quieter than down south. And then we had guys in Helmand and some really nasty areas, Sangin, which notorious, Kajaki, and so like Chad Reglin was going to like some of those areas. And he was a fearless guy, right? And he was fully, he was trained well and, no doubt, like, but those are the kind of the areas that we were going to. So, most of us were working with Army, and I think there's pros and cons, I guess, to being Army versus the SEAL teams, but generally what I think I've experienced is that Army SF is a little bit older. Yeah. Maybe a different maturity level. Not always the case, but generally. Yeah. Because you have some older guys, and the guys I had worked with were from 5th Special Forces Group, and they had not a lot of Afghanistan experience because I think that was 3rd Group. That's kind of their AOR. But they were from Iraq and they had tons of like combat experience from Iraq. So I really liked it. I liked working with those guys. I think I like working with the SEALs too, but for different reasons. So But overall, I think for the most part, most of our teams had a pretty solid experience with their special operations, their soft teams they were supporting. Not
Yeah.
always the case, but for the most part. And we just did the best job we could, like in those situations.
Yeah. Yeah. The difference between Iraq and Afghanistan and terrain, I've heard, is it's a slightly different
Yeah,
terrain thing.
right.
How'd that affect
Yeah,
you?
I mean, like where I was a bit more mountainous
Yeah.
terrain, and like Helmand and Kandahar, not super mountainous, but um, there's a lot more foliage, I guess. I mean, where we were in Iraq, it was pretty open,
Yeah.
but we were on the near the Euphrates at times, so there was a green belt kind of around the Euphrates River. But Afghanistan, it's just, especially in those areas in the south, really rough areas because they were just so heavily IED'd, and it wasn't always easy to get around. Again, not necessarily mountainous, but just rivers and kind of just the general terrain, areas where the Taliban could hide out and ambush. Well, a
Yeah.
lot of opportunities for that. So it was a very tough situation for anybody to be put into.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, my other team was kind of in the east, was a bit more mountainous. So it kind of varied, because Afghanistan is one of those areas where if you look at the country, it's hard, you can't really say, hey, like, this is the geography of Afghanistan, or this, like,
Yeah.
because it varies all across the country. And in Iraq, I think it maybe varied a little bit less. Obviously, in the north in Iraq, you have Kurdistan, more mountainous area, but it probably varied less than it did in Afghanistan.
Yeah. On that deployment, was there any like things that stood out to you, like now that memories, whatever that you want to share at all?
Yeah, I mean, I remember, like, so I was with a team up in the north. It was somewhat busy, but definitely not as busy as what the guys and happened in the south. One thing I wish, just like we were talking about Chris, like I kind of like try to hold on to those memories of Chad Reglin,
Yeah.
because he was on, when I was in Iraq, he was on the team immediately prior to me, and then he went to Afghanistan, and then he got back, and then he joined our team, very short notice, but I had the opportunity to interact with him, kind of talk with him a lot. And one of the things as an officer on an EOD team, like in Afghanistan, working with SOF, is that you're kind of responsible putting a report out, and so you have to talk to every team to some degree. And so, I mean, I remember his reports were like, "Oh, I just did 100 IEDs, like this week," or crazy stuff. He was always trying to help other people out too. Like one point, the forensics guys kind of got onto him because he was sending the pressure plates back to the
Yeah.
training unit, and but we kind of defended him, like, there's so many that, like, some of these were being processed, but it was important for us to get those back, and he recognized that, so he was getting that back. But it was always fun to see his report. Sometimes I'd have to bug him a little bit to get his report in, and he's like, oh, like, it was we were having an Eid party, like some party, and he'd throw some little nuance into his report. And so I always look forward to hearing about what he was doing. And he had a really great reputation and relationship with his team. And so we as a team, it was a hard deployment for us.
Yeah.
Because I mean, one of our guys ended up getting injured in that fall, being a triple amputee, and then kind of getting that call. It's like, like, it's so heavy. And then I tried to go see him before he left, but he was sent out to Germany. I'm not going to say his name because I don't know if he's comfortable with it. But yeah. So I mean, going through that experience, and then I actually Siege of SOTF, which is like the task force, they kind of got on my case because as soon as I heard, I called back to the mole unit, and I almost jumped the gun a little bit on their process, but which kind of like when Reg got killed, like I kind of heard a little bit after the fact, but that was a really, I mean, that first one and then the second one just hit so hard for me and for the whole team. And that was like January 2nd in 2012, and we weren't that far from consolidating going home. So
Yeah.
yeah, um, yeah. So I'm lucky to be in touch with his mom, Shireen, to this day. But man, like like the emotions like going through that, and I lucked. I mean, I was fortunate to be able to speak at his like do a eulogy for him in country.
Yeah.
But I missed his funeral obviously, and back in Anderson. So he grew up not too far from me, Anderson, California, which is
Okay.
like an hour from Chico.
Yeah.
So we already had a connection going in. But yeah, I mean that in that kind of like after that in our mindset, like there was no, like going home. There's just not a lot of humor. It was just like it was just a kind of a rough time for us.
Yeah.
And we tried to make the best of the situation, but yeah, so that was affected our whole kind of rest. We ended up leaving back in February. I drove his I think he had like a motorcycle, and I drove up with the mobile unit Suburban, like that, just a bunch of his stuff up to see Shireen and Scott, and yeah, so that was like just like some really heavy moments that you don't
Yeah.
at being on a team. I think you kind of have to go in the mindset that this could happen, but still you don't think it's like it. And obviously we once it happened, like everything was locked on, like making the notifications, all that. But still, it's like you don't expect it to happen, right?
Right.
Like even though like you prepare for that. So that was like for moment 3, that was a really rough time. And then of course, right after that was Chris
Yeah.
hit, and Chris, his team kind of replaced our team in country. And I remember talking to Chris. I mean, we were both at moment 3, and you were kind of on like different platoons, but we would always keep in touch. I mean, he threw like a birthday party for me, so we were always pretty close. And again, like a regret of mine, like I wish I would spend more time, with them. But
Yeah.
like you're on a platoon, like you're just focused on getting through the training. Kind of you're locked on, and like sometimes it's especially when you're in your own platoon, you spend a lot of time with that group, even
Yeah.
like going out and stuff, or just going to get drinks or whatever. But I still stayed in touch with Chris, and I remember like emailing him like all the way up to like almost the day he got killed,
Yeah.
just on like and he asking questions about various things, and like especially before he got out there, and so yeah, and then Sean Carson like right after that. So it was a very tough stretch, I think, for everybody at the moment. But having been like on one of those teams, and of course it brought our team closer.
Yeah.
And to this day, like our team, we still every year his place was the waterfront,
Okay.
the bar, and kind of turned it into an EOD bar. There's a big, if you go there, if anybody goes there, there's a big like a plaque thing on the wall with a shirt that he wore in country, some pictures of him, and every January 2nd, like we go there and kind of have drinks and sort of talk
Yeah.
about him, and make sure that his memories and lost. We just keep it alive. It's the same kind of thing I'm trying to do with Chris as well. So
Yeah. Yeah. Pardon me. The last, so on Chris, it's interesting. So I was out at China Lake, and we had driven up to China Lake, and we were going to do our Aces Ices out there. And Chris was out there with his team, was out there with his team. And I think they had just finished up something. They were going down the hill for the weekend, and then we're going to come back up, and I think they were starting an FTX. I think that's what it was. But I remember trying to keep things alive. So on my Facebook, the last things that I have on Chris was, he had asked before he left, like, hey, do you need anything? And I was like, nah, man, I'm good to go, And then I loved Pepsi. That was my thing.
Really?
And So I was like, man, I should have asked him for that. So I was like, hey, if you could get me like, just like a bottle of Pepsi,
Yeah.
And he came back up with like, is it like a 24 or a 36 pack? And like,
Nice.
yeah, and he was like, here you go. It's like, oh, dude, I love you,
He
man.
was always thinking of other people. Like I
Yeah.
remember back when we were at EOD school, he was like doing everybody's taxes for free. I'm like, man, he's such a nice guy.
Yeah.
Like he's just like volunteering to do people's taxes. It's like,
Yeah.
who does that?
Right.
Who's gonna do? I'm not gonna do someone else's taxes. I can't even do my own.
Exactly.
So, like, but he was like a very sharp guy,
Yeah.
and would also like take, just same as Chad, would take his shirt off your back and give it to him, or his back and give it to you. One of my favorite Chris stories back in Florida was that he used to run on, I think, is it Highway 98?
Yeah.
That 98. And he would run there. And one time, someone drove by him, and a guy in the like the back seat threw a beer can at him, and like a full beer can. I think it may have dinged him, or it didn't hurt him, but ooh. And so what happened is that the car stops at a stoplight. Chris sprints towards the car, and he sprints, gets to the car, and he reaches in, he pulls the guy out of the back seat, starts beating on him. And they're like, I mean, they were not expecting that. I think it was some young, they were just, and so they were like instantly apologetic, but like somehow like it ended without, no police were called, right?
Yeah.
So the situation resolved itself, but they were like, oh shit, and so that was a fun, one of those Chris stories I always remember, but yeah, he was obviously a great guy, and still, like I remember for his funeral, they passed around like these stickers that said, be more like Moscow. Yeah. So like they were putting that BM, LM like stickers, and like, because, he was just that kind of guy, just like Chad was. So it just sucks to lose those kind of people, and so the best we can do now is just like continue to, and so I have two kids, and my older son is Callan Reganlin. So, and I didn't just name him that. Like I asked for permission, and my other son is not named after Chris too. So, like that's kind of one of those things, just like keeping their memory, alive, and make sure that they know about who these guys were, so they can like live up to like these type of men, so it's just one of those things.
Remind me after this. I want to talk to you about something, because I'm starting to work on a project with that specifically in mind, like keeping the guys' memories, and who they were. That's my
for sure
thing.
And those are the kind of the stories that make them up, and that's kind of one of the things I wouldn't mind knowing about the other, that I don't personally know, some of the other Navy EOD techs that were killed. Even like it's not just the guys that killed in action too. And I think I saw this on your podcast with Nap, just like some of the guys that unfortunately have, taken their own lives. These guys have stories too, and we should remember them as well. So so I certainly, we could talk offline about that.
Coming back after, just coming back from being in Iraq or Afghanistan, and being in combat is one thing, but coming back after ending a deployment so heavy, right? How was like kind of just getting back to daily life here?
It was a transition. I think just going from that to back to, and I don't know, I can't speak for everyone, but I know when you're in combat, I think a lot of people have the mentality of life is very straightforward and focused. Your job is to keep everyone else alive and go on that mission. Those patrols, usually the EOD guys run a dual point, with some other soft person kind of looking for the outside threats. You're looking at the IEDs, and going into that, and then going straight. And the unfortunate thing about us, and it was a big complaint, and I think they eventually kind of fixed it, they sent us straight home And so we went from Afghanistan, refueled basically, and went straight home. Yeah, not really I mean, like I had some anger issues, not in the right mindset, right?
Yeah.
So, and I've sought some therapy and stuff about that. And don't want to get into too much detail, but basically, that was a big transition, and took some time. I had to do my officer board right away, which actually might have helped me because then I had to focus on something.
Okay.
So I kind of put all effort into that. But still, it was really a already hard to transition when you come back from any deployment, really, but especially combat deployment. But then especially when you have those things happen. It just took time to kind of reset. I mean, the only thing I don't like the Hurt Locker. The only thing I think I kind of can kind of relate to is if you look at the final scene and he's like coming from his deployment and he goes into a supermarket and he's like looking around and like, what is this place? Basically, because you're just like, so I think there's a mindset shift again. But that's kind of why I think they need to build in some sort of decompression time. Of course, now it's a little bit different, but at least when people were going on those heavier deployments.
I think it was good because I think they eventually figured that out.
Yeah,
at least to some extent. That you can't just go from super high intensity all the time, always being aware,
right,
to like now go home. And
just
everything's fine.
Just live your normal life.
Yeah.
And it's actually just going to complexity of our lives. That's not something you deal with on deployment. You just focus on staying alive and keeping like the people around you alive, and completely mission focused. And that's how it should be. You're not worrying about like taxes and things like that,
right.
All that kind of stuff. But then you get back and then you have to deal with all the mundane bullshit, like that. You have to deal with it, but you don't want to. And so I think that may be a factor with some people when you do a lot of deployments and you kind of sort of longing to go back to that time frame when, your life is pretty clear cut what you need to be doing.
Yeah, you talked to, I would say, almost everybody that I've talked to anyways. Like, deployment is the thing people look forward to.
Right, absolutely.
They're like, oh, work-wise, it gets easier, like home-wise, you shut it off.
Yeah.
Everything is just like, you've got one goal.
Yeah.
And it's keep everybody alive.
Right.
As much as possible, do the job, and then and then you get back, and then too, like, even just deployments that aren't combat, like you get,
of course,
you get back from those, and then you're like, oh crap, now I gotta fix the sink because that's been broken for 4 months, and this thing and that thing.
It's a mindset shift, whatever deployment is. It's for sure. Yeah. So even if you're going to Bahrain for 6 months or East Africa or wherever, like there's still going to be that shift. So
it's just magnified.
I think it's just that in that situation it was like exactly.
So you did Iraq, Afghanistan, and then you went back to Iraq.
Yeah, that was interesting there. So after Molina 3, I went to, I was actually supposed to get orders to Guam. And, then they got shut off. I was really kind of mad about that. And I was going to switch with someone else who didn't want to go to Guam because he had his family in San Diego. He's going to go unaccompanied.
Okay.
And I wonder if I would have been on the same team as you. And it was supposed to be a soft deployment, like
You probably would have.
It's like right in that time frame. But anyway, so I was kind of mad about that, and they sent me to like Crane, Indiana, and I'm like, what the, I don't want to go there.
Yeah.
Where's that? I looked on the map, and it's in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
So, and I was like, I kind of like was not happy about that. And then of course I had to shift my mindset. I mean, in route, I'm not going to show up and be like, oh, I mean, that's like lame. Right.
Yeah.
So I got up for it, and then I was, pleasantly surprised by how awesome it was, in general. So it was a shortette where we did tons and tons of like basic demolition ordnance, as well as like support to new technologies coming out. So it was, and we also did a ton of stuff off base,
Okay.
like with, and this is kind of going back to the relationship building. Like on my Afghanistan deployment, one of the things we did when we were at my site is that we were supporting the Army, but there was a time where there was infantry coming by and they were like doing some missions. And I like asked permission from our 18 Alpha, like the company or the ODA commander, like, hey, can we go? We weren't doing anything for a couple of days.
Mm-hmm.
Can we go out? So we sort of like found ways to sort of like do more. And kind of that goes to like the Crane scenario where we built more relationships with off duty, with like the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department, bomb squad, the FBI there, the TSA guys out of Chicago at the O'Hare Airport. So we had more work than we could even
awesome.
field. We were doing diving at a place called Lake Glendora, a big like old coal mine that they do like underwater demolition, all kinds of interesting testing. So we were filling our calendar with things to do, and that's kind of how I always want to do, like, get the most out of it. So that ended up being like, I think a shortette for anybody is one of those where you can make of it. You can sit and do nothing, like just wait for the phone to call.
Yeah.
And if we did that, it'd be okay. I mean, not that great, or you can like find ways to like do interesting things.
Yeah.
So that was really kind of that whole detachment in a nutshell. But then I went to a staff command in Virginia. It was associated with DTRA, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, but it was actually we were co-located, but we weren't worked directly for DTRA. It was initially the U.S. Strategic Command, like a component of that, and then it transitioned when for the mission set changed to U.S. Special Operations Command. So when I was under U.S. Strategic Command, that's where I was going to Korea a lot, supporting like their major exercises, which are some of the largest exercises the U.S. military conducts in Korea multiple times a year. So that's kind of how that collectively, those at times there would be 3 or 4 weeks, right, in one period of time, and then you do that a bunch of times. It kind of adds up. What happened was that when the SOCOM mission kind of like took over, the mission set still focused on kind of more the counter ISIS situation. And at the time in Iraq, there was a siege SOTF, a Combined Joint Special Operations Task Force, and we had just, one of my great friends, he's on active duty, so I won't say his name, but one of my best friends, who from our dive school class, and he worked at Warcom, NSW, and basically started kind of this transition where they had an EOD guy go with the staff forward to Iraq. And so they had a Marine EOD tech, MARSOC guy, because it's shifted between a MARSOC and a SEAL commander of that task force. And so when it was and then MARSOC, obviously there's a MARSOC EOD guy supporting, but when it was Navy, a Navy EOD guy, he was the first one. And there was one guy interim between, and then I went over there.
Gotcha.
Again, like relationships on this deployment. I was a staff officer and I continued to do my staff officer job throughout the deployment, but I found interesting things to do and ways to both contribute and get something out of the experience. So I ended up doing a lot of work with the special forces teams there and the Navy EOD teams working with the Army. And I did a bunch of work with one of the NSW teams there in Mosul. And I'm very grateful and thankful for the EOD tech who was there. Awesome guy. And he was working by himself at the time, and he invited me to help him. Basically, again, you don't get invited to do that if you haven't built some sort of nexus of trust. And I was able to augment them into Mosul, working with the counterterrorism service. So that was 2016, 2017 timeframe when we were retaking Mosul from ISIS.
Okay.
So I was able to kind of go for several weeks at a time and augment and see, like, essentially we were going forward and like close to the forward line of troops. And it was, I mean, that whole deployment was kind of like a Wild West deployment to me, because there was just like, I think the rules of, not so much the rules of engagement, maybe to some degree, but the restrictions were kind of lessened for a period of time.
Right.
And so freedom of movement was greater. but I was going in with the with the SEAL team. So I mean, saw a bunch of combat there. I mean, there was a couple times. One of them, kind of funny, not so funny at the time, but we were setting up mortars, and we were doing some mortars, and we had snipers up in a different area, and setting up the mortars, and the SEALs, I don't think that's their bread and butter, mortars.
Yeah.
And that's like Army, Marine Corps infantry. That's like, they're people that is their job.
Yep.
As a SEAL, I mean, you have so much going on. It's kind of like an EOD tech. You're not going to be an expert in a mortar, right?
Right.
And so as we're getting this thing set up, and we're trying to dial it in, because, I mean, there was a tower, and you could go up this tower with snipers, and you could see them down there. We had B-52s coming overhead, Apaches, like all these aircraft dropping ordnance, because a lot of that is the ground force commander communicating with the CTS commander on who's even more forward, because you had some restrictions on how close you could get.
Gotcha.
But sometimes that got pretty close.
Yeah.
But their job was kind of communicating so they could drop ordnance on ISIS targets. But we also sort of did our own augmentation, but getting that mortar set up, and they're getting it, trying to dial it in. First one goes in, and it's like the Wile E. Coyote thing, or the cartoon.
Oh no!
Shit! And it literally,
Dude.
And fortunately, I think it like didn't. I don't know. It didn't like meet the appropriate time to arm it.
Yeah.
And it landed and it hit, but oh shit! Right.
Yeah.
So after that, they got it dialed in and right out. But that was funny looking back, but not,
Yeah.
everyone's just diving out of the way, right? Just think of like a cartoon when I think about that.
Yeah.
But there's certain situation. One other situation with a couple other like little vignettes, I guess. One was we went out, and this is kind of interesting because we went out one time, and I was supporting, and I was in a different area. And the other EOD tech was basically disarming like an H-bid, I think, or something else. And I was in an area with some of the SEALs, and we stopped, and it was an area that just had been cleared by CTS, but because generally they would clear the spots, and then we would kind of be coming up right behind them.
Okay.
Like we weren't clearing beforehand. But there was a lot of stuff still around, and I mean, that was kind of crazy because we stopped, and I had people walking towards me. One guy had a suicide vest, and I didn't know if he was gonna what was going on.
Yeah.
He was just turning it in, but the time frame, you kind of see that, and then there was a vehicle right kind of by where we were parked, and when I went to go look at it inside, there were a bunch of IEDs like in the front, and the back was full of ordnance. And so it was kind of funny because as I'm kind of going to clear this Iraqi old man comes over to me, and he's like, in English, he's like, "Be careful." Yeah, I'm like, I was like, "Oh shit!" I guess I was like surprised. Not only did he speak English, but I guess he was being nice to me. He's looking out for me, like this guy. And so obviously he'd probably been under occupation for a long time, but that was a surprise, And it was fine, but yeah. So I mean, and one other one was that, again, relationship building. We were able to go out and augment the British SAS there for a bit, and one of those times when we went out. We were searching an area. It was like an old munitions factory, and it was amazing to see like the level of production that they were able to get. It was like almost like a small country when they're making their own ordnance. And as we're going through this, one of the things like everyone tries to get is like an ISIS flag.
Yeah.
And we're with the SAS. We go in to clear this one area. I'm on one side, and he's over here on the other side, and goes in behind, pulls out this massive flag, and I'm like, "Oh shit, that was a great find." And the SAS guy comes up because he was trying to get one. He's like, fucking Yanks. And he was like pissed, but also kind of laughing at the same time because he got it. And he's like, you got it, you know? So I just remember, yeah, fucking Yanks. Yeah. So yeah. Anyway, it was, I think, one of those deployments where it was a staff deployment and I still had my staff job and I kind of was able to maintain that, but I was able to do more than, you know, expected. And we did a lot of training with CTS back in Baghdad with their sort of EOD teams and their kind of not EOD techs, but clearance, basically the guys that would go and identify IEDs. And we actually stood up the first CBRN team.
Nice.
With CTS. So it was interesting because we got to do like work with the State Department on that, getting funding and all these different things. So I really liked that. And so after that deployment, with all that, I kind of was like, through my, like, that's not going to get any better than that deployment for me as an officer. Like, that's it. Like, for me, like, so, and that's when I decided to be like, hey, I'm going to get out.
Yeah.
After that, I sort of ending on a high note, I guess, with that one. And then that's kind of where I started my first transition, basically. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. How was it going well, sorry. Before I asked the how was the transition portion, did you have a plan of what you wanted to do when you got out?
Kind of. So I would say it didn't work out, but it ended up working out kind of in the long term. Growing up, I think I was an only child. I mentioned my dad was a biochemistry professor. I always kind of want to get into like the biotech sector.
Okay.
So I went through, this is 2018 timeframe. So I went through a couple organizations. One of them, shout out, which I think at the time, not a lot of EOD tech, Navy EOD techs had gone through, but now a lot of them gone through, is the Honor Foundation.
Yeah.
Very great transition organization. So that was about that time frame. I was doing those transitions organizations for veterans, and then but I was struggling because I found it was difficult to get into like the biotech sector. It was just like a lot of them just maybe didn't recognize the benefits of having a veteran background, and one of those areas where they're like more, hey, you don't have this specific background,
right?
Sorry, you know, like we only look at your little snippet of your resume that applies when they don't see the broader picture. So I didn't get it, and I like tried and applied for jobs, didn't get into the biotech sector. So I ended up actually, I joined the reserves. I went back on active duty for about 2.5 years at in Point Loma, Nighway Pacific, Naval Information Warfare Center Pacific, and I was working with unmanned systems, and I really enjoyed that. And I was doing engineering. I was working like on a larger project, maritime systems, and but I still, in the back of my mind, I wanted to get into like the biotech field. So after I did that, I went back to being like a regular part-time reservist, and tried another time to get in. Didn't work out. Again, trying to apply for jobs, same kind of thing. And so I took a DoD contracting job for SOCOM for like 9 months, and ended up, at the time I was back east and in the DC area. That's when I decided, like, hey, I'm just going to use my GI Bill. Again, one of the veteran benefits that you know, and I went to school for like 9-10 months to get a master's degree in biotechnology. And that kind of like was my foot in the door to getting into other things. Yeah.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah. It's interesting. You know, I've seen on the Honor Foundation thing. Yeah. I've seen a lot of people recently that are it really seems like it's opening up for EOD techs that are kind of, the word got out that hey, reach out to them. You know, if you have a certain background, then it's a little easier to kind of get in on that. And every single person, you know, it is the exact opposite of the review of TAPS, where TAPS, they're like, I mean, there's a 5-minute section that was worthwhile, and the rest of it is stuff we already knew or doesn't really isn't worth much. Honor Foundation, everything that I've heard is like, it's awesome for just like reason after reason after reason.
For sure. And it's very well funded. So funded Navy SEAL Foundation. They have quite a bit of money, right? Like big foundation. So, and now they have campuses all over. They started with San Diego and they got campuses all over. So that is one of those, like, being a Navy EOD tech, like if you're getting out, you should tap into every resource like that. And there's a lot of different ones, not just that one, but I feel like the veteran transition area, I mean, maybe some people would disagree with me, but I feel like there's quite a few things you can get into to help you make your transition like smoother.
Yeah.
And that was one of the big ones that I for sure would recommend without hesitation for anybody, as definitely kind of gets you, because they look at the why, like what is your why, what drives you, getting out of the military. Okay, you got to put that behind you to some degree. I mean, you have that experience with you, but what's going to drive you, and that helps hone into like what kind of company or job would make the most sense like for you. So
it's interesting. I was talking earlier today about EOD techs are like, we're problem people. We thrive when there's a problem and we can look towards a solution, right?
Right.
Half the time we're mad that there's a problem, but like that's where we're happiest also, it's a weird dichotomy.
Right.
But I like that, you explained the Honor Foundation, how they look at things, because it's kind of that way, right? Instead of, a lot of times we look at like, how do I make money? What jobs can I do to make money, right? And then we get those, and like there's plenty of jobs where you can make good money.
Oh yeah.
But a lot of times you're not going to be happy because you haven't looked at like, what do I like to do? So kind of when we tend to look at problems, usually it's like, where do I want to end up?
Right.
And then how do I get there?
Sure.
Right. And it sounds like that's basically
exactly
what it's doing.
Like take, for example, like I was a defense contractor for a while, and it's a great way to go. It just wasn't where I wanted to be for me. I think it's great for many people, and you make a lot of money doing that, no doubt. You can make a great living. But I just wanted to do something different. I was kind of looking to get away from, just with the time I had to try to transition to do something different. I still had the reserves to kind of put my foot in the door at the military, and still had things I could get out of that experience and contribute. But then I was looking at maybe some other avenue to go into.
Yeah, that makes sense. So now that you're, you got into kind of the thing that you wanted, the biosector, right?
Right.
Is looking at that in terms of family time and stress, military, and then the just, even though when you get out you're not in the military doing some things that are basically like tied directly to the military essentially, how has that kind of affected family life and stress?
I think it's a balance. So being in the reserves, and I'm the CEO of a reserve unit. I love my reserve unit. It's a bunch of Navy divers, and we're out of Norfolk, so back here.
Nice.
So Norfolk, and we support the MARMAC, which is the Mid-Atlantic Regional Maintenance Center dive locker. So basically diving on ships, like essentially keeping ships at sea, in a way. And it's a huge dive locker. I think that and the one in Swarmick in San Diego, like the sister locker, are some of the two biggest in the Navy. So that actually takes quite a bit of time, because even though I'm not the one diving, there's a lot of things to like line up. And as a reservist, like I'm on my, like all these different, they make it kind of challenging, right? All these administrative systems. And it's kind of like a lot of people don't want to put up with that, understandably, and decide, hey, they'll start the reserves and they'll say, hey, this isn't for me. Like it's too much. So that's been a challenge, because I'm kind of doing that while also pursuing I'm still new to this sort of journey to the biotech field. I'm only 2 years into it. So it's been tough at times, but at the same time, there's stability, because I kind of can make my own schedule. To the most degree, my job now, I don't really travel much. And then with the reserves, I can travel, but I can it's not too much. So I think work-wise, there's a lot to do, but with time, just using time management, you kind of have to can work that. Whereas I think that's still way, more challenging or demanding to be an EOD, active EOD tech on a team, because you have all the workups and you're training and you're going to schools and then you're going to deployment. So there's a lot more. Stability is hard, I think, to come by, and you can get there, right? And guys do it like yourself, but it's still, I think, once you're into a civilian career that's stable, you just don't have to worry about. I could be mobilized. I'm a reservist, right? So there's a chance of that. But overarching, the day to day is pretty set, or like I'm not worried about something throwing me
Yeah.
like a wrench that's really going to disrupt my daily life.
Nice.
But it's challenging to do both.
Yeah.
Like it's just something that takes some getting used to.
Yeah, that I could see that.
Yeah.
A lot going on, but that day-to-day portion, I think, is kind of I think that's the thing that a lot of active duty kind of wants, is like a little bit more of a set schedule.
Yeah.
I think most people don't mind like going on the trips here and there, but like when you're home, you kind of want to know that every day is basically going to be this, and nothing crazy is going to like, you're not going to end up, that at least one day a week something's going to come up and you're going to be there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Longer hours. I think it depends on your life, like where you're in life. Like if you have a family, you kind of want more that's stable. If you're a single guy, like, oh, sign me up for that school, and they'll do that. And I love the unpredictability, like, so I think the whole mindset changes like once you get married and have kids. So then you need to have some stability. Otherwise you're causing your family disruption. And, so, but as a single guy, it's all in, like that. So, I think that's the nice thing about being out is that I have more control over the situations. So it's a pro and con, right? There's certainly a lot I miss about being on active duty.
Yeah.
I mean, overall, it was the right decision for me after that. And I was at almost 11 years, right? At that point, so it wanted and this point, like I've got over 14 years of active duty with my like kind of activated reserve time. So, it still was the right time for me to.
Yeah, that's good. I think that's important, and probably I'm starting to sound like a broken record on here, but I think it's super important that at every time that you're up, whether you're enlisted officer, no matter what job you have in the military, like do a pros and cons on like staying in versus getting out.
Right.
And it's not like, don't just do the pros and cons because you don't like your job. Like do a pros and cons because that can be a thing too. And it's been for me at points where like, I get a couple years in, I'm like, why am I doing this? You know?
Right.
And because just, life happens, military things happen, and you're like, man, this is terrible,
Yeah.
And then you think back and you're like, man, when I did that pros and cons, like, okay, I'm going to focus on those things that I enjoyed and the reasons why I re-enlisted at that time or whatever,
Yeah.
But also like it can help give you like a calming when you do decide to get out.
Choice. I thought about it. Yeah. And it helps too to like even write them down sometimes.
Absolutely.
To like make have like a whiteboard or chart and be like, hey, you're like list them all out, and then you could see it. Just a visual of. It helps maybe. It's not going to make the decision for you, but it maybe helps influence that decision a bit more than if you're just started thinking in your head.
Right.
Yeah.
We're all scatterbrained people.
Right.
Anyways, don't be like start out.
Most EOD, after a while, we've got a memory maybe not the best. So
yeah. So what are you looking forward to now?
I think I'm looking forward to what being able to do the career that I want to do, which is the biotech field. And right now I'm actually taking like probably more lower paying positions to do more hands-on science type of jobs rather than business, because that's kind of where I'm looking at. I'm, looking to see if I can stay. And in the science side, ultimately it's best to get, like a doctorate, at least for some situations. So I'm kind of positioning myself to see if I can, even though, I've been, out of school, not master's, but in general, like, older than most graduate students, to see if I kind of want to position myself to be able to do it and then make the call. So I'm kind of keeping that option open right now. But I would foresee myself kind of longer term being somewhat side of the business side of biotechnology. The nice thing is, I think it's harder if you go into the business side to then kind of try to get back into the science a bit. Like it's easier to make the transition where you're kind of heavier in the science, and then especially like being having leadership experience going into like the business side, like,
Yeah.
later on. So that's kind of what I'm looking at longer term, sort of a civilian side. And probably, being in San Diego, there's a huge biotech sector here. So probably staying here for a while. And in the reserves, I just enjoy, I enjoy having that aspect where I can still be in the military and contribute. I mean, the whole Navy Reserve now is kind of refocusing their mission on kind of warfighting readiness. So, reserve units that really didn't have a clear mission now are consolidating to larger units that have more clear mission, like
Okay.
our mission being like, if we were to go to war, a large scale war, we would be mobilized to initially support kind of diving, like the active duty component, like
Okay.
essentially keeping ships in the water, because that's
Yeah.
going to be a really heavy thing, and so they'll need as much support as we can get. So something like that, where you have a warfighting mission. So I kind of like that. I also like about the Navy Reserve that it is relationship based, and that you can find areas of the Navy to contribute to that you couldn't do as a active duty. And for example, like I've been able to do orders at the U.S. Naval Research Lab, doing biotech type research on my reserve time.
That's
They even
cool.
have that here in San Diego. They have some more of the biological research. So I've been able to sort of maximize, like, not only doing my kind of job as the CO of this unit of reserve divers, but also looking at other parts of the Navy that I can. And again, you have to like try to get funding for it, but get funding to support different things going on in the Navy that are relevant, like directly relevant to like where I'm trying to go civilian career wise. So I think that's, from a work standpoint, having all those in the reserves, and then my civilian career, and then being stable for the family, and having kind of like being in an area. My wife Brittany is from this area, so it's nice to be back. Kind of like
Yeah.
we've been living in a lot of different areas, and I obviously like that. I wouldn't say it's nice about the housing prices or anything
Yeah.
here, but we're fortunate to be like we able to rent from her father, like one of his houses. So
Nice.
we were in a nice situation. Like and that was part of the reason for our move. We moved back this summer, is that house opened up, and then in our kids are young enough where we can get them into schools and not be too disruptive. Like my younger son is 4, and my older son's 7. So so I think that went to our decision, but now kind of making a life out here and kind of coming back full circle to a degree, when I was my first duty station in Coronado, and being back in California, being close to my parents in Chico, because they're getting older, and just traveling back east to see us was challenging. So now having like a shorter distance, like to San Diego, is a lot better for them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a hard thing, being in Virginia Beach right now, and I grew up in Livermore, so
Oh, that's right.
not too
Yeah.
far
Bay
from
Area.
Chico.
Yeah. Of course.
And my mom still lives in Livermore in the winters, lives in Montana in the summers.
Yeah.
But both of those places are very far away from Virginia Beach. So
Right. Yeah.
yeah, that is it'd be nice to be able to find a reason to get close.
Yeah, to get closer. I mean, yes, being close to family is just important for everyone. And so, I think that was a major factor in our decision, even though the housing prices and everything are challenging, and just the cost of living is high. So, but we're making the best of that, and fortunate to be in the situation we're in right now. And then I think longer term, even though, like, for me, I'm taking a lower paying position that I did as a defense contractor, like significantly lower, but I think in the long run, it'll pay off. It's kind of like it's not taking a step back career wise, but taking a step back from a pay standpoint. And then and it's nice having the reserves, because it does keep some, like, the healthcare going, and a little bit of pay. So having some sort of a backstop. It also is great because when you lose, if you lose your job, you can go on reserve orders for usually for a temporary period of time. So kind of like a safety net in a way. But it's so regardless, I think, even though I'm taking that lower pay position, and that's something, like, I feel I've gone through 3 transitions. Initially off active duty in 2018, off that set of reserve orders in 2020, and then kind of like after leaving my job as a defense contractor.
Yeah.
And so I've kind of like seen it from different angles. So like that's where I'm kind of passionate about helping people, like, as they go through their own their transition from active duty.
Yeah.
Just seeing if there's ways I can help people, or if they want to try to get in the biotechnology sector, because it's an area there's gonna be a lot of potential and a lot of jobs. So
Yeah.
that's an area that I'm happy to help people out
Yeah.
in the community and outside the community too. But
Nice.
so
Yeah, something to look forward to or to think about in terms of uh, going back for a doctorate.
yeah.
My brother is 11 years older than me.
Oh yeah.
So he's well, let's see, I'm 40 today. So he's 51.
Uh-huh.
Yep. That's terrible that I literally just did the math for 11. But maybe I will not be in the bio sector because
No.
no. But he actually just I think 2 years ago finished his doctorate.
Oh, no way.
And
Okay.
yeah, he's in education and
Yeah.
whatnot, so a different field, but still like
Still, I mean, there's a way to do it.
Yep.
It's a personal goal, but it's also like a goal, like a career goal. Because
Yeah.
like it's when you do that, you're taking a pay cut again, like for a period of time. But again, for me, and I think that's like I like to tell people this, because my mentality on like money is like I want to have enough to be comfortable, but when I die, who cares if I have $10 million or 5 million or whatever, as long as I'm comfortable, the family's comfortable, we're
Yeah.
set up. And so that's where I'm like, hey, I'll take a lower paying position if it's more what I'm passionate about,
Yep.
than taking a position that's paying bigger. And that's something I try to like tell other people, like, hey, don't just because it pays more, don't just look at that. Look
Right.
at what do you want to do?
Right.
Can you support yourself? Right.
Yeah.
And then then kind of how can you make it work? And the Honor Foundation helps you with that, helps out with that somewhat. But that's kind of for me, like the money is a factor, but it's not the most important factor. I want to do something I really want to do.
Yeah.
And that's another area where the biotech sector, I feel like I can find a niche where there's a lot of different ways to like, basically help other people out, and whether it's medicine or whether other areas like agricultural biotech, there's like a lot of different energy, so I haven't really found exactly where I'm going to be, but I feel like I'm trying to position myself to discover that. I'm still learning a lot every day, and that sort of this journey, but I mean, it's kind of, I'm on the path I think I want to be on right now.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything that you'd like to, as we kind of close out, is there
Sure.
anything that you'd like to, give to any of those listening, or specifically Navy EOD techs listening?
Yeah. I mean, I think, for the EOD techs especially, like I'm always someone that would be willing to share my experience on a one-on-one standpoint. I'm also one that, for people that are getting out maybe earlier in their careers, like the Navy Reserve is something that has been a solid thing for me that I've really enjoyed, even though it can be rough and frustrating at times. So that's an area where I would say people like Navy EOD guys getting out, usually less than 10 years service, consider it, at least consider it. And I'm happy to give you my perspective. And then I'd say just like, when you get to the point where you want to transition from active duty, just do as much as you can, put a lot of thought and research into it. Don't wait till it's too late. And don't think that like you need to stay in your job doing it until the last day, because someone else is going to like that. And that the job is going to fail if you don't do all that. Like should be a healthy period where you can have some time to like focus on your next thing. And so don't shortchange yourself, like take advantage of all the different transition organizations that you can, and try to position yourself to define what what your next passion is. And so, that's just something that I'm still discovering, but it's taken some time to iterate through it and figure out what I enjoy and what maybe is not something I want to do with my life. So, I'd say I'd share those things, and just as a, maybe as an officer too. I mean, you have a unique role and on the team, and I've experienced that going through, but I wouldn't, just being an EOD. And I think at one point I was interested in being the SEALs, going SEALs, and that's a great route to go too. But I wouldn't change anything because it just the group of people that were fortunate to work with, like you and like everybody from our going back to the beginning of our conversation,
Yeah.
high school, EOD school, to my teams. I'm sure your teams. I think in one of your podcasts you said you've had a lot of great officers you work with, great teammates. So you work with high caliber people regardless, and I think going in as an officer, make sure you show humility, because a lot of the enlisted guys are probably smarter than you. Like, and some of them, like I know what I was going through, like had college degrees, and some pretty like heavy hitting schools too, and so like these, so I think that was like not a wake up call, but it's like, hey, I mean, like like I'm surrounded by some incredible people that, so that was kind of like a moment of like, oh, this is great. So again, just fortunate to have, the experiences I've had, and, looking forward to seeing where things could go from here career wise. So
that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
I appreciate you sitting down and talking with me, man. It's been good to catch up,
100%. It's great to see you. And, we'll have to like invite, I'd love to come back. And I know I saw you were looking at eventually having some teams on, or just, groups of people. And I think what you're doing is fantastic. And, I really, I've already been a listener, like watching a bunch of the podcasts, and so looking forward to seeing where it goes and kind of capturing that. I think when we had a conversation before this, capturing some of that history of like the EOD, especially some of the guys that like were prior to my time, that like, that you've interviewed, that I really didn't have any kind of experience with, like I kind of know my area or my time frame, like generally like the kind of post 9/11, but guys that have done a lot of other interesting things, I think one of the guys was Oklahoma City and things like that, like just other experiences. So really cool, and looking forward to kind of continuing to be a listener and follower your podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Oh, awesome.
All right. Well,
cool.
We will. Yeah, we will definitely have to. That would be a fun one. Get a bunch of us from the class together. Dude,
it's an easy one to do. It's probably like an easier when you're looking at groups starting that out. That's an easy one because it's all guys that you you served with and know well. So
that'd be awesome. We'll make it happen
for sure.
All right.
All right.
Thank you for listening to the Echo Oscar Delta podcast, where we talk to Navy EOD techs and hear the stories that they want to share.